Hello and welcome to the Jazz Drumming Masterclass. I'm your host, Zac Treby. So we're just going to get into a little bit of the jazz genre and what the genre entails, what you should start with, what your sound should be, because every music has a particular language, right? So if we know that, then it's pretty easy to listen to the music and find out for ourselves what we should do. What is that? What is the sound of that particular genre, and why do they do that? Anyway, okay, let's get into this. Okay, jazz is not like rock and roll. Let me say that, okay, because rock and roll is very, staccato. Right? Very downstroke oriented. That's staccato. A very extreme example of staccato would be this, meaning short, okay, versus legato, which is open, okay. That's also a very extreme example of legato, okay. So you have staccato and legato. The difference is, of course, rock being a very staccato, very stiff particular style. Jazz is a lot more open, right? A lot more legato, very open. Right? We have to draw the sound out. In rock, you can get away with that downstroke. I mean, if you're not downstroke when you play in rock, I mean, you're a double rock drummer, right? Now, that's the thing with jazz. Jazz is very flow. It opens, all right? So if you sound more open, you're playing it right. I've seen a lot of jazz drummers be very, downstroke oriented. Well, that's okay. It depends what kind of drummer you're trying to emulate or imitate, because we all have drummers we like to imitate, right? We all have our favorites. But for the most part, jazz is very open, okay? We have to draw the sound out. So that being said, let's get into, what jazz is. It's a very upbeat oriented genre, okay? Whereas rock is very downbeat, right? Downbeat, they have all the hits happen on the downbeat for the most part. With jazz, everything's on the upbeat. And of course, you have, you do have downbeats, like on 4, in jazz we crash on 4. Right, that was beat 4, or the end of 4. You do hear jazz drummers crash on beat 1. However, most of the time it's followed up with a crash on beat 4 of the same measure. So it'll be on beat 1. And then on beat 4, and that was Philly Joe Jones' little thing right there. His thing was coming out of the turnaround or the structure or form. You'd hear him do something like this. But sometimes he'd hit the hi-hat twice. Now that was the Philly Joe sound, right? So, all this in mind, okay? Just a little bit of structure, okay? Or I should say, just some building blocks that this genre really has as a language, right? Every genre has a language. Let me say that. Let me be more intelligent educator and say that every music has a language, right? Every genre has a language, right? In rock, if you did, you're pretty good. Now, of course, that sounds terrible on this jazz kit, but, it should be very powerful. Right there, you got that style. You're a rock drummer. Great. That wouldn't, unless you're playing like Tony Williams, that won't really go over in jazz for the most part. Depending on, your touch and everything. Because jazz is a very touch-sensitive genre. Of course, you can beat the living hell out of your drums because I've seen Art Blakey and Elvin Jones do that, but it depends on the style of context, that you're doing in the jazz genre. So let's start from square one here. All right, so in order to develop a good sound in jazz, we should focus on the ride cymbal, because the ride is the primary voice of this instrument. And that being said, you want to focus on your jazz time. Right? Think about, am I getting the sound out? Am I drawing it out? Are my notes more staccato or more legato? And, staccato means short, legato means long or elongated, I suppose. Whichever term you'd like. Something I like to do is I like to stay in one position in a slower tempo and let my wrist kind of do the work. I'm kind of letting the notes kind of come out, all right? And that's, you get the feel when it's nice and flowy. And I'm lifting my stick, okay? I'm not doing that, okay? I'm not staying down. I'm lifting it up. Now you don't have to concentrate on this all the time, because eventually your body and brain will have it. You'll just be able to go to the drum set and wail away. Granted, you're working on your strokes, because that's important. So it's mainly a full stroke. I'm lifting it every time, and that's a very legato thing, a very drawing out type of movement. So it's very important to focus on your sound, because jazz is a particular sound. Let me involve my hi-hat here. Notice how I'm not beating the living crap out of the cymbal. Although there's nothing wrong with that, because Elvin Jones, would do that at times, right? Nothing wrong with that. The band is kicking. But for the most part, it's good to have a touch. All these great jazz drummers, all these great jazz drummers had a touch to them, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. And this makes your rock playing and your funk playing so much better. You learn how to draw the sound out, and you have more available to you. Excuse me. And when you have more available to you, it becomes a lot more fun, right? So something I like to do, and I teach my students this as well. Whenever I have a student in here, or I'm on a Zoom lesson with my students, something I'll always tell them is, be comfortable with your ride. And once you're comfortable with your ride, you can start gaining momentum in other tempos. We'll get to comping in a minute and how to do that, but for the most part, I want to focus on the ride, because that's the primary voice, and that's nothing takes away from that, or nothing can take away from that. That's pretty important. So, the ride. Once you've developed that touch and you've gained momentum, right? Your touch and your technique gets stronger, so then you can start speeding things up. Now, naturally, at faster tempos, your fingers are going to have a part to play. In slow tempos, it's mainly my wrist. That's slow tempos. In faster tempos, see that the camera, but my fingers are a lot more at work. You probably can't see that, but that's okay. I'm trying my best here. Especially at really fast tempos, you know, your fingers are going to work. Right? I mean, that's just the physics of this instrument, especially jazz. I mean, you know, and it takes a while to get up to that. Right? But honestly, if you work on your sound and your technique regarding the ride cymbal, everything else will take care of itself. And of course, you still have to take the time out to, you know, get comfortable with different tempos, which we're about to talk about very soon. However, again, before we go on to comping and tempos and melody, which I will cover, it's important to just spend time on the ride cymbal, because that is very, very important, okay? So let's get into the swing thing, as I call it. All right? So here's how I start my students out, okay? I will have them play quarter notes on the ride, right? Sorry, it's very downstroke, right? If they can't get the triplet thing yet, that's okay. I'll have them play quarter notes. And then with 2 or 4 on the hi-hat. Let's slow that down a bit. See, everything in me wants to downstroke that, because I was playing some funk fusion rock stuff earlier, so now I'm very, you know. I just wanna funk out and go nuts with my downstrokes, but you know, I gotta draw the sound out. So that's the sound. Okay. Getting back to the quarter notes, right? Now these are full strokes, mind you, and that's important to know. Okay. 2 and 4 on the hi-hat. Once my students have that, and once you have that, then we can start getting into comping, okay? Next, but after I say that, or I should say before I say that, the ride cymbal has skips, right? And that's a triplet thing. Sorry, that's really bad. Okay. So if I were to smooth that out into a straight thing, it would sound like this. Right? It would sound like 1, 2, and 3, 4, and 1. And that would sound great as a rock thing. But now I gotta swing it. Right? And the way you can think about this is, if you count 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet, 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet. Now it's swung, right? That's called swing, or swing triplets, right? Or swung triplets, or upbeat language, upbeat jazz language, okay? So now we have 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet, 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet. And the skips happen on beats 2 and 4 on the let of the triplet, you know, 1 triplet, 2 triplet. Okay, that's your first skip. 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet, 4 triplet. So it happens on the last note of the triplet. For all you non-drummers are out there, what does that mean? Doesn't matter. Then what matters is you can sing it. Ding, ding, ga, ding, ding, ga, ding, ding, ga, ding, dang, ga-dang. By the way, if you can sing it, you can play it. Dang, dang, ga-dang, dang, ga-dang, dang, ga-dang, dang, ga-dang. So, monkey see, monkey do, or monkey hear, monkey do. So right there, that's something I use for my students. If they're not getting the triplet thing, I have them sing it. And then I show them, usually on a page or by way of triplets, what that looks like and sounds like. Okay. And then they make the connection up here. So that's pretty cool. So if you have triplets, 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet, against the ride, it'll be this: 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet, 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet, 1. Okay. And that's your jazz sound. Now, jazz being a very upbeat bass genre, the cool thing about jazz is when you throw in a downbeat out of nowhere, it sounds hip as all hell. Seriously, check this out. I'm going to play all upbeats, and then I'm going to throw a downbeat in there, and it'll be very, very noticeable because it'll change the sound. I just started with a downbeat. So see how it kind of takes away, in a good way, from the feel and kind of adds a little spice, right? So it takes away from the upbeats, but it adds spice at the same time. So it doesn't really take anything away, but it's very noticeable because right there. So I mean, the most hippest place, or the one hip place that you can put a downbeat, is on beat 4. And that's usually with turnarounds at the end of a structure. You'll hear them either crash on 4, or they'll come in on beat 1 and then 4, which is pretty cool. And like I mentioned in the beginning, that's a Philly Joe thing. We'll get into that, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. Now, jazz being a very upbeat genre, okay, that's the jazz language, right? The 8th note jazz language is mainly upbeat. Again, downbeats are great, but, obviously in moderation, okay? And it'll sound a lot more hip the more you throw them in lieu with the upbeats. Now let's get into comping, okay? Let's assume you have your ride cymbal together, okay? And the ride cymbal, right? Nothing can take away from the ride, okay? So let's get that straight. We're going to start with our snare drum comping, all right? If you have your ride together and your hi-hat together, you're right as rain. And your hi-hat should always be on 2 and 4 unless the music tells you different, okay? By the way, something I did not say in the beginning and I want to clarify. The way to learn any genre, especially this one, is to listen to tons of the music. That'll tell you a lot, I promise. So, but we're going to get into, probably right before this class ends, what changed jazz, or the course of jazz, which albums. And you guys can go check them out. There's mainly 4 of them, but there's more. However, let's continue. Okay, I'm going to start with the end of 1, right, with jazz comping, right? So if I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, I want to put a note right after the 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. And all you have to remember is once you come down to that ride, boom, you got it. All right. If I had all quarter notes here, right, and I accented every single upbeat, of each beat, it would sound like this. That sounds like a shuffle to me. Which it is. That's what a shuffle is, okay? But let's not get carried away here. Let's backtrack. Anyway, so right after my ride cymbal, on the upbeat, I want to add a snare. 1 and 2, 3, 4, 1 and 2, 3, 4, 1 and 2, 3, 4, and 1 and 2, 3, 4, 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 1 and 2, 3, 4. Okay? Now, if you're having trouble with that ride pattern, the main jazz ride pattern, try doing it with quarter notes. I think that should be easier for you, okay, if you're having trouble, okay? And this is all that I work with my students with, okay? Let me say that more intelligently. This is what all my students work on. Excuse me. So, getting back to this. So once I have the end of 1, 1 and 2 and 3, 4 and 1 and 2, 3, 4, 1 and 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, ding, ding, da, ding. Okay, so now I want to go to the end of 2, okay? Now that's going to land right on the ride skip. Look at that. Okay, that lands on the upbeat 8th note of beat 2. 1, 2, and 3, 4, and 1, 2, and 3, 4, and 1, 2, and 3. Excuse me. 1, 2, and 3, 4, and 1, 2, and 3, 4, and 1, 2, and 3, 4, and 1, 2, and 3, 4, and. I promise you, this is crucial. You know, this is gaining your sound. And, you know, after years and years, I still have to go back to this and just work on my sound, because when you don't use it, you lose it. And no amount of, you know, playing is going to help you unless you actually dig down deep and grab that and work it, right? Grab that sound and work it. Okay, once I have the end of 2, then I want to move to the end of 3. So it's very much like the end of 1, except now it's on beat 3, the upbeat of 3, right? 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 1. Now, I don't know about you, but I find that the end of 1 and the end of 3 are a lot more sharper than on beats 2 and 4. And we're going to cover beat 4 in just a second. But I've noticed, and this is just my observation, maybe you guys find different. I find that the upbeats of 1 and 3 are much sharper, right? They're more aggressive than the upbeats of 2 and 4. And that's something I came across a long time ago when I was just kind of messing around with some of this years and years and years ago. Is right here. I noticed that was a lot sharper than the upbeat of 2 and 4. Right? So I just accented, 2 and 4 different times. So that's something else that you can delve into. So let's move on to beat 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, and 3, 4, and 1, 2, and 3, 4, and 1. So right there, look at that. Okay. That is right on the skip. Right? Except it's on beat 4. Right? On that upbeat of 4, that there's a skip there. There's a a note on the let of the triplet. 1, 2, let, 3, 4, let, because it's triplet. One triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet, right? 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet. That's a better way to say it. So this is off the cuff. So I mean, Anyway, okay. So now let's see what happens when I just stick with the upbeats of 1 and 3. Let's see what happens, right? I'm just gonna mess around with that. Sounds a lot more aggressive to me, right? Now I'm going to mess around with the upbeats of 2 and 4. So beats 2 and 4 sound a lot lighter, a lot more less aggressive to my ears. Okay. Let's see what happens when I alternate between some upbeats on 1 and 3 and maybe some upbeats on 2 and 4. So let's see what happens. Okay, so now I have a lot of jazz vocabulary that I can play with, right? I have a lot of vocabulary. So right there, that's tons. Now we haven't even gotten to the bass drum yet. And the bass drum plays a few roles too. I mean, but before we add our bass drum into comping, let's check out some of the old school bass drum feathering, because that's pretty important. Okay, so if you've listened to Freddie Freeloader by Miles Davis, you'll hear Jimmy Cobb do this. It's pretty hip. That is right there a Louis Armstrong move, hands down. Full stop. Because back in Louis Armstrong days, which he was one of the founders of jazz as we know it today, okay, because way back when, jazz was a whole different animal when it was first starting, okay, and these are just some of the building blocks that make up this sound, okay. So Louis Armstrong, right, if you listen to Hello Dolly, right, hello Dolly, this is Louis Dolly. It's so nice to have you back where you belong. Right there. You hear the drummer do a rim click, right? Or a cross stick, whatever you'd like. On beat 4. Okay, so now that we covered that, I guarantee he is feathering the bass drum. Now, this is what feathering the bass drum is not. If it's really heard, right, like very loud, you're doing it wrong. So something I tell my students is if you could literally just barely graze the head. In other words, if I were to make this simpler, to have the bass drum beater maybe an inch away from the surface of the drum. Now, I'm not going to lie to you, that's really hard because we're dealing with an instrument that is very physical and very, especially today, we're so used to, playing with our heels up. play with our heel down and play really soft, I mean, we'll kill ourselves. I mean, it'll drive us nuts. But really it doesn't, because, once you develop the touch of this instrument, you're more likely to go, wow, like I have so much dynamics available to me, so much more available. And that's exactly what this genre offers. It's just a lot of different stuff that you can use in your other genres that you play. And that happened to me when I first learned jazz. It just brought all kinds of stuff out of my playing, and I was able to move from style to style. So getting back to the bass drum feathering. Now, I'm purposely making it a little louder than usual, right? So you can hear it. And I don't really know if the microphone's picking this up, but it doesn't matter. So now Jimmy Cobb on Kind of Blue by Miles Davis, when he played, Freddie Freeloader and all these other things, all these other songs, he didn't like to feather the bass drum. That wasn't his thing, okay? But he just left the bass drum out, right? So he was mainly keeping the bass drum out like that, right? And even if he was feathering the bass drum, you couldn't hear it anyway. And that was the whole point. I mean, mainly a timekeeping device, right? But again, it's not crucial for you to feather the bass drum, okay? But if you can do it, you come closer to the tradition of these great drummers. Now, getting back to the comping, okay? Let's go back to the end of one. Now, here's where it starts to get fun. One thing I teach my students is you can go back and forth between your snare and your bass drum. Now, this is where we can, get the bass drum a little louder than usual. So you can bring it back like, maybe 2 inches or something, just for this exercise. You can do that, or a little more. As long as the bass drum is not louder than the ride cymbal, you're okay. Okay? So something I teach my students is, once the bass drum comes into comping, it's a whole different animal. So here's what we do. After we play our snare, we add a bass drum on the next measure. The same place, right? So if it's the end of one, you let a snare go by, right, for one measure, and then you do the same thing with your bass drum on the end of one. So this is what it will sound like. So see how we're starting to bring in some of the comping stuff, right? And the bass drum is starting to, at this point in time in this genre, after the feathering and the Louis Armstrong stuff, now the drum set's starting to open up a bit. All right. So if you listen to the bebop records, they're starting to open up, right? So past Louis Armstrong and Ella Fitzgerald, which I should have covered in the beginning, but that's all right. There's a lot to this. So it doesn't really matter what order I cover this in for this masterclass. But past the swing era, that's what started to happen with bebop, which is mainly Charlie Parker, okay? But getting back to this comping idea, okay? In bebop and hard bop, you'll hear this stuff, okay? You'll hear Jimmy Cobb do this on Kind of Blue. This sort of the bass drum following the snare drum, right? So everything we did with the snare drum, we can do with the bass drum. So if we're on the end of 2, okay, simple, right? So we can start putting our snare drums or our bass drums wherever we want. We can put them on the end of 1, the end of 2, the end of 3, the end of 4. I mean, the same thing we did with the snare drum, we can start doing with the bass drum. All right, and we can even play a question and answer thing, right? Question and answer is, I want you to get ready. I'm going to do something, and then I want you to clap the second part. Ready? Okay, you should have gone, right? So this is your question. This is your answer. Okay? Rhythmically, that's what that is. Okay? And this is a language. Jazz is a language. And the more we understand that, we can communicate with ourselves on this kit. We can play things that sound musical, and we can talk to the soloists in front of us when we're playing, right? So the bass drum can become more of a contributing factor instead of just kind of keeping time on, quarter notes on the bottom, right? While your snare drum does all kinds of fun stuff, right? Well, your bass drum can become part of that. I mean, that's the sound, right? And that's what they do. Now, you cannot do anything you want. That is a myth in jazz, okay? If you've listened to jazz records, which I highly recommend you do, and we'll get into that soon on, what to listen to, because some of the stuff is very important, especially listening. If you've ever listened to a soloist, pay close attention to what the drums are doing. I guarantee they're following the soloist, right? They're communicating with the soloist, because all this stuff is completely in line with the solos. Guaranteed, because it's a language. It's communication, right? And it's improvising. Literally, excuse me. It's improvising. And, we're talking to the soloist, and we're following the soloist. It's completely in line with the solos, right? So in order to have that, we have to have our ands of ones, the ands of twos, and the ands of threes, the ands of fours, and everything in between, in line. So we can communicate as a language, right? Because music is a language, right? So, moving on, right? Once you have your comping down, again, nothing wrong with putting your bass drum on beat 4 at times. I mean, that's very hip. So if you can do that, if you can have your comping in line so that it falls in line with, the soloist, and maybe you'll hear something that the soloist does, and you can kind of jump on that because this is mainly an improvised genre. This will help you in your furthering of the jazz genre, all right? Because back then in Louis Armstrong, Ella Fitzgerald, and the swing era, the drums weren't really a contributing instrument. They were just there to keep time, which we still do. But when bebop and more the more jazz changed, the drums became more of a soloing or a contributing factor, right? So that being said, right, when we have our comping down, something we want to think about is melody. Okay, so now what do I mean by that? Okay, let's take a melody like Mr. PC by John Coltrane. I'll slow it down a little. Okay, so Mr. PC falls in the category of a blues form, okay? And a blues form is basically a 12 or 16 bar phrase, okay? If you remember that, you're okay. And it'll depending on whether it's 12 bars or 16 bars, you'll know by the chord changes. Anyway, so one of the best things we can do as drummers is sing the melody. Why? Because that gives us a reference point or a center of reference, right? Something I like to do is maybe I'll play jazz time over the melody and accent little things here and there, right? So I have to know the melody in order to do that. I'm going to play the melody, and then I'm going to accent certain parts of the melody. Maybe I'll do this full speed. 1, 2, 1, 2. Sorry, that was terrible. I totally put my fill over the bar line. That was an accident. No, it wasn't. I was going. Okay. So right there, now it's really difficult for me to sing and play at the same time. But I purposely kind of made a corny example of going along with the melody, okay? But the melody is kind of like the map, right? The structure of our jazz form. And the more we understand that, the easier it becomes to play this genre, okay? And melody, I mean, the simplest way you could start this is play Freddie Freeloader by Miles Davis, because it's an easy melody. Da, da, ba, da, ba, da, I just put a bass drum on 1 to show you where the form starts again, right? Where it ends and it starts. Because right there, that was your center of reference, or my center of reference, if you'd like. Well, it's all of our center of references if we're playing in the band together, right? So if I were to sing this melody and play it the way I would like to play it, this is what I would do. All right, let me start that again, so you can kind of grasp the scope of how important this is. I'm going to do this again, and I'm going to play it in a little more of a different setting, drum-wise. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Da, 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 da. Right, that was the beginning of the form again. So I did some things that, someone might not do, but just to show you where I landed on the melody, that's what I would do, especially for something like this. If it was like more mellower, right? I might ride, I might ride my cymbal a little more and stay away from the comping a little bit, right? But if the band's really pumping, and I gotta put those notes in there. Right, so that's okay too, depending on the context, right, of what's happening. So if the band's really pumping and the soloist is going nuts, yeah, beef it up a little bit, But the way you do that is you work on the tempos, okay? You work on different hand exercises, which, I'm not going to show you here, mainly because that's something that I show my students in the private lessons, and it would take a long time on YouTube to do this. But however, let's make this simpler. So we have a bunch of different tempos available to us. Besides melody, okay, we have tempos to deal with as drummers, right? So, one of the exercises I do with my students is I will have them play about a minute of tempos from 100 to 200, all right? And, of course, the faster ones are very hard, okay? I'm just going to demonstrate a couple of examples. I'm going to put a metronome on here and see what happens here. So this is at 100. Okay, hopefully the microphones can pick that up, but it doesn't matter because I'm going to play it 100 anyway. So this is what I do have my students do for 1 minute, right? I'll have them play at this particular tempo, which is one of the hardest because it's so slow. So there's space to consider with this. However, if you can get this speed, right, this very slow speed, I mean, you'll be a monster. Here we go. Let's check this out. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. So the key here is just to relax. You guys can play with me if you like, right? You can use this particular, metronome concept for anything you want. You know, working on your ride cymbal, your comping, right? Your jazz soloing. I mean, all kinds of stuff. So the key here is to take 100 BPM, right? 100, and just get comfortable with it, right? If you must take the skips out, you can do that too. So anyway, so that's one of the first things I have my students do. Then we bump it up to 130. Now that's a little more difficult, but this is a work in progress because jazz is a work in progress. That's something you have to understand. If you can get through 100, then you want to go to 130. So you beef it up 30 every time, okay? This is more of a moderate tempo, right? We do the same thing for 1 minute. So I probably played a lot longer before, but let's get into this. Here we go. So we're going to start this. You just ride on your cymbal for a while and get used to it. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. So the key is to lock into the time. Now, for those of you who claim you don't need a metronome, please throw yourself off the cliff right now, because that's one of the dumbest things you could ever say to someone. No professional drummer would ever say that. Sorry, that made me lose my time. So, as every professional drummer knows, the metronome is crucial. You can't get away from it, okay? You want to be a professional drummer? Guess what? The metronome is going to have to turn into your best friend. And it will. And it can. I used to hate playing with a metronome, but now I love it. So, a side note. I have found that when I haven't played with the metronome for a while, I'm not as sharp. Wow, my microphone just... There we go. Okay. I'm not as sharp. Stupid. I should have put a pop filter on this. I'm not as sharp as a player when I haven't played with the metronome for a while. And then when I jump on it again, I mean, it's like night and day. All of a sudden, I'm right as rain. Like, I can play all kinds of stuff. It's the stupidest thing in the world. But it's true that it helps. I mean, if I had two particular teaching methods I had to teach on like a desert island, like I can only have two, it would be playing the music and playing with the metronome. That'd be the only two I would use, because they're the most effective ways to teach how to play drums, because one trains your ear and one trains your time. I mean, that's just my opinion, though. I do have many other ways to teach styles. However, I like those two a lot, aside from other things. But anyway, so that's that with the metronome. You cannot get away with that, or get away from that. Let's say that, okay? So now let's go up to 160, all right? Let's see. Now, some of you who are trying to play with me, if you can drop it right now, if you're having trouble, that's fine. All right. Here we go. So right here, if you're having trouble, then just do quarter notes, okay? Here we go. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now with the comping, you can also leave space, and I'll explain that in a minute. So if you're okay with that, right, go up to 190. Now this is a little harder, but that's okay. You know, if you're enjoying watching this, just watch it. You know, you can learn a lot. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now the key to all of this is to relax. Seriously. Don't just start with quarter notes in your hi-hat. Rock that for a while. I mean, there's no rules here, because we all had to go through this. Every jazz drummer you know. You don't just wake up one day knowing how to play jazz. It doesn't work like that. You have to put the work in. Notice how my fingers have been a lot more involved, right? Okay. That's pretty huge. By the way, that was a mistake when I said I bring my students anywhere from 100 to 200. That's 300. If I made a mistake, I apologize. So I bring them anywhere from 100 to 300. So now what I would do is I would bump it up to about 210. Okay, so we can go there. Right? Now, there's a point where things start to straighten out, right? But not yet. Usually around 300 that straightens out, okay? You can still swing, right? But now, our fingers are going to get involved a lot more. Here we go. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. When it comes to the skips, right, your fingers should be at work a little bit. was terrible. So again, if you're having trouble, right, doing the skips, do the quarter notes like that. There's nothing wrong with that. You can throw in a skip every now and again. You can do that. That's what started to happen when, jazz started to continue outside of, the bebop stuff and the hard bop. Alright, so let's go to the last one would be probably like 240 maybe. Okay. So again, we're still swinging, right? I don't want to go to 300 today, so I'm not going to do it. That's for a different masterclass. Right here, again, be on quarter notes if and be okay with that if you're not up to par with the techniques yet. 1, 2, 1. Let's stop there. Okay, now, so I mentioned, your main ride cymbal pattern, right? Now, you probably heard me during all that where I started to mess things around. You probably heard me moving the ride around, and you'd be right. Basically, I let my ride skips follow my upbeat comping, and that's the next step after you've gotten the bebop thing and which is jazz. That's the sound, okay? It's not always right to put all kinds of notes everywhere. I mean, that's for more modern stuff, which is fine. But the essence of jazz, and you hear this on every record, is, space and comping and swing and groove, because that's where it all came from. So that's the language. So let's get into varying the ride cymbal. Now, it's very simple. Whereas back in the 1940s and 50s, jazz, the jazz ride cymbal was a repetitive mainstay, right? For the most part, it didn't really vary from that, except for, some drummers like Philly Joe, who do stuff like that. And it would vary. You'd hear drummers kind of play a couple more quarter notes and then they'd skip again or start to skip again, which is great. But for the most part, they relay into that. But later on, then the drums started to move into a different animal altogether with jazz. You heard more quarter notes, right? So there's more space, and then they started implementing on the upbeats of the jazz comping. They started implementing those skips, so the comping and the ride will go together. So that's pretty cool. And then what happened was people started, putting ties in, right? Elvin Jones, he was great for putting ties into that ride, right? So it became what Elvin was doing with John Coltrane was a whole thing. It was a whole sound, and people started to gravitate to that outside of the regular skip, right? Elvin made it okay to open things up, So he made it okay to do that, and which is pretty cool because, there are drummers now that, follow that Elvin Jones line, if you will, that direction. And, but again, I'm going to say it right now. All the great drummers, including Elvin Jones, everyone today, all the, old school cats like Jack DeJohnette, Roy Haynes, any good drummer understood back, meaning from the beginning. Anywhere from, Jelly Roll Morton. Right. To, Louis Armstrong, right? Ella Fitzgerald, all those people. To Miles Davis, all the way to Jeff Tain Watts, there's just certain things that won't change. And, we all know that with rock, it starts here. That's where you start rock. Well, jazz is this. That's the main sound. So that being said, let's talk about some records, all right? And this is going to be short because I'm going to end this. All right. If you want to check out some jazz records that'll blow your mind, check this out. Of course, if you want to go back to like Louis Armstrong and all those guys, check out Louis Armstrong's greatest hits and Ella Fitzgerald, those are more, timekeeping stuff. But then go to 1959, okay, the year 1959. There are 4 records for the most part that changed jazz, right, or the course of jazz. And you can listen to the records from the 40s and 50s and check them out. But then once you get to 1955, you have records like Kind of Blue, all right, which is Freddie Freeloader, Jimmy Cobb with Miles Davis, okay? Very, straight ahead, very, it's got So What on there, stuff like that. Then you have Dave Brubeck, right? Take 5, right? Or I'm sorry, it's called Time Out, but the song Take 5. All right, if you know jazz, that 5 groove, right? Probably played it really bad. But anyway, that's Joe Morello on drums. That's a great record. That changed a lot of stuff in 1959, along with Kind of Blue. Then you had Charles Mingus with Mingus and that had Danny Richmond on drums, and he was talking, he probably does it a lot faster than I do, but there's a song in there that, oh my God. He does like a really fast shuffle, and back in the day, I used to just go, you know what I mean? Trying to play that song. I forget what song it was. Then you had The Shape of Jazz to Come with Ornette Coleman, and that had Billy Higgins on there. And that album was killer. I mean, you know, along with these three other guys, I mean, that was a massive statement, the shape of jazz to come, because, that was kind of like the starting point of more of the modern sound you might hear in jazz. And you can't start from the modern stuff. You got to go back, because if you don't understand the language, I mean, you're not really gonna make a dent, right? So I mean, those are the 4 records to check out. Of course, you can check out everything before then, of course, because there's so many, and so many are just mainstays, like Miles Davis, Milestone. I mean, that classic, I mean, that's your tradition right there. I mean, that's Philly Joe Jones, that's huge, and Miles has got like all kinds of stuff, like, towards the beginning of the record, you hear, actually, I think it's faster than that, and Philly Joe keeps that up for like a long time, like a long, long time. And, you could follow a great study would be something I tell my students is, if you follow the drumming line, the drummers of Miles Davis, right? You have Philly Joe Jones, right? You have after him Jimmy Cobb, right? Jack DeJohnette, right? If you go farther, and with Philly Joe and Jimmy Cobb, that's a study that should take a long time, as my mentor would say, right? So right there, that should take a while, and then you go to Jack DeJohnette, right? And then you hit people like Roy Haynes eventually, and there's Connie K's in there somewhere. I just don't remember where. Also, if you want to do another line, you could do a big band line where, you had Chick Webb. Chick Webb was like the main guy of big band drumming, which is a whole different thing. But they're all connected though. You have Chick Webb, and eventually we have Mel Lewis, Duke Ellington, so that, Sonny Payne. Oh no, that wasn't Ellington. That was Count Basie. I'm sorry. Duke Ellington played with like Max Roach, and that's another one. All these guys, they played big band stuff. You had guys like Buddy Rich. That's another one. Because he was in there. He played on an Ella Fitzgerald record. And I always trick my students, because I'll play what's that song? It's Ella Fitzgerald and Louis Armstrong, and all you hear is, all right, throughout some of the song, and then all of a sudden you'll hear, like out of nowhere, you just hear a comp, just one, and it's Buddy Rich on there. And I ask my students, I say, okay, let's listen to this, and they don't know who it is, and then we'll listen to it, and I'll go, okay, who do you think it is? And they'll take their most smartest guess, and they'll get it wrong every time. And I say, that's Buddy Rich. After they know who Buddy Rich is, of course, their jaws just, drop, because Buddy Rich was nuts, of course. We all know that. However, I'm making a point, is even Buddy Rich knew the language, right? I mean, that's important. It's important to know these genres. It's important to check out Chick Webb, Philly Joe Jones, Mel Lewis with Thad Jones, that's more big band, right? And then, smaller jazz combos, Jimmy Cobb with Miles Davis, all these guys, and you can continue that. Those are lines that just, they're all related, because the jazz sound is, it's a sound, it's a language. And, I'm going to stop there, because I don't want to get overcomplicated, because we can get into fills and all this stuff. But if you don't know how to play the music and listen to it and go, okay, right, now I know what to play, because there's a repetitiveness to it, and there's a mainstay. There's a lot of mainstays in jazz that you just can't mess with. All right, so thank you for joining in on this master class. I'm going to do another one, right, to expand on some of this stuff, right? It'll be a little bit of a different animal, but, practice hard, listen to a lot of records, and I'll see you guys soon.